The Bengals finally gave us positive contract news for the first time in what feels like a long time. While I don't think anything is imminent on the horizon, I will explain in this video what the new timeline should look like between the Bengals and Trey Hendrickson. Hi again, Bengals fans. John Sheeran of A to Z Sports Cincinnati here. And by the grace of any and all football gods, we got some positive news about Trey Hendrickson and the Bengals front office. It was first reported on Father's Day by ESPN's Jeremy Fowler that the Bengals and Trey Hendrickson, quote-unquote, resumed contract talks after a very contentious past couple months about the subject. And when I say contentious, I mean that in every single definition of the word. There were jabs taken from Trey to the Bengals. There were jabs from the Bengals to Trey. He showed up for one voluntary workout and made a giant extended press conference out of it. He didn't show up for mandatory minicamp despite the warnings from Zach Taylor and the team about being fined, and now he's subjecting himself to be fined well over $100,000. And while all of this was happening, there was basically no communication back and forth between Trey and the Bengals. And even when communication was happening, there were reports that Trey's camp was only speaking to the lower level members of the Bengals front office and not the likes of Duke Tobin or Katie Blackburn. So now that talks have resumed, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's significant progress toward a deal being done in the near future, but I do think a soft deadline has to be established with the talks resuming now. Because if you're the Bengals and you're holding firm here, you know the real deadline is week 1 of the regular season. That was the case for Joe Burrow in 2023. That was the case for Jamar Chase in 2024. And obviously there was a 50% hit rate there. But this team does not negotiate during the regular season. They save that for the entire offseason. And if there was, again, no progress to be made with Trey, then you probably wouldn't start talks again until maybe training camp if he's sitting out then. Like right now, nothing is happening. There are no mini camps for Trey to report to. There's no workouts. There's no reason for anyone to be in the building outside of their own accord. There's nothing that's pushing the Bengals into doing this right now. Whereas if it was the start of training camp and Hendrickson did not report, then that would be okay. Let's try to bring him back into the fold here as we have 6 weeks until the regular season begins. I think the only reason, considering who the Bengals are and how they've traditionally operated, is that they want to get this done before training camp begins. Because it should go without saying that you want Trey Hendrickson to be a part of your 6-week ramp up into the regular season. You don't want him just waiting on the sidelines, either holding in like Jamar Chase did last year or just being away from the team entirely. This has been a constant for Bengals training camp, going all the way back to 2022 when you had Jesse Bates being placed on the franchise tender and he didn't sign it until right before week 1. In 2023, you had negotiations for T. Higgins and Joe Burrow taking the entirety of camp, and obviously they didn't get anything done with Higgins that year. And then you had Chase last year holding in and just watching training camp practices. For a team that should be so focused on starting fast and looking like the best possible version of themselves in week 1, which has not been the case in the entirety of the Zach Taylor era, you want as little distractions and as quality of training camp practices as possible. And having your best defensive player out there obviously helps. And going back to that word again, distraction. When it has to be asked if whether or not something is a distraction or not, it's probably a distraction. And this was basically the answer that Joe Burrow gave when he was asked about the Trey Hendrickson situation. He said, of course it's a distraction. He actually said, of course, twice, technically, to reemphasize the point. But if one of your best players is not participating on the field with you and everyone's talking about it, it's naturally going to be some level of a distraction. It may not have been a huge distraction in the locker room now, considering it was just May and June and not July and August. But again, if one of your best guys is not there, you know, that means something. And it would not shock me if Burrow's recent answer on this subject spurred the Bengals just a little bit to re-engage talks with Hendrickson. And if you're looking at things from Hendrickson's point of view, he set himself up to be fined over $100,000 for missing minicamp, and he would be fined well over that amount for missing the entirety of training camp as someone who's under contract. At a certain point, those costs do add up if there's no new extension to be signed. And obviously you can swallow those costs with a new extension, but that hasn't happened yet. And I have no doubt that he wants to be on the field for training camp, but it wouldn't do him any good, and it wouldn't do any of his past statements about holding out and sitting out actual games if he were to just return for training camp without a deal. It does take two to tango in this case, and it does seem like both sides are at least starting that process again. So to come back to the table now, when there's nothing pressing for another 5 weeks, I do think that this is a step forward in the right direction towards something getting done before this really starts to impact the team. I wish I could say the same about Shamar Stewart and what's going on there, but you know, you got to take the wins when you can get it. A training camp with zero distractions and restrictions has to be the Bengals' goal going forward. And I do think that resuming talks with Trey Hendrickson right now, it does allow that goal to eventually be accomplished.